Effective breathing is absolutely critical for fast breaststroke. And effective breathing is all about getting air in a way that minimizes the amount of resistance swimmers create when they breathe. If swimmers can breathe in a way that allows them to still create a lot of propulsion while getting the air they need and minimizing the resistance they create, they're going to be able to race with a whole lot more speed. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. Breathing is a skill in breaststroke that many swimmers struggle with. They either struggle to breathe in an effective way, they struggle to recover from the breath quickly and effectively, they struggle to breathe at the right time, or they do all three. We'll cover what needs to happen to breathe effectively, we'll cover what needs to happen to recover from the breath effectively, and we'll also discuss timing of the breath and the breath recovery. Let's check it out. So the key skill we'll watch for here is whether the hips drop during the breath. And so what we'll see is right here, those hips are staying right in line the entire time. And so this swimmer is able to execute that breath without letting the hips drop. And so when swimmers are ineffective with the breath, they tend to come straight up. And in this position here, you'd see the hips drop down beneath the surface of the water. And that's going to create a ton of resistance and a ton of drag, and that's ultimately going to slow them down. So if swimmers can find a way to breathe, just like this swimmer, in a way that allows them to keep the hips up without dropping the hips, they're going to be able to create a lot more speed. We'll be able to see the same thing here in this swimmer. Now, if you watch the breath there, there's not going to be really any drop of the hips as she takes that breath. If there is, it's going to be really small, but as she breathes here, she's coming up, the hips are staying up, and then she's getting back into line. And so doing a really good job of keeping the hips up through the breath, which is absolutely critical for keeping resistance low. If those hips drop, resistance is going to go up, speed's going to go down. The second thing to pay attention to here is the timing of the breath. And so what we'll see is that the breath tends to happen, and this happens in most swimmers, is that as the upper body starts to rise, as the pull happens, so right about here, that's where the breath starts to happen, and it happens fast. It's not a slow, patient movement. Once the breath starts to go, it happens fast, because if swimmers start lifting the head early, then they're going to be creating more resistance than they need to, so the longer they can wait for it, the more effective they're going to be. But once the upper body starts to come up, once they start to pull right there, that's where the breath needs to happen. And so it has to happen within the rhythm of the body. So she's breathing with her body. She's lifting as the body lifts. That's when she's going to take that breath. And the more effective she can be with that, the more effective she's going to be at delaying the breath to the point where she has to breathe, but not get out of line any sooner. And the faster she can make that breath happen. So we'll see the same thing with this swimmer here. As she pulls through, that's where the breath happens. With the rising of the chest, the rising of the head, everything comes. And so as she starts to pull back, that's where the breath happens. And right when she gets everything set up right there, that's where you really start to see the rise. And so in some ways, she's using the pressure on the water to lift herself up from that position. But that's when the key timing element needs to happen, is when the breath comes up, is when the pull really starts in earnest. That's when the breath's going to happen. So rather than breathing earlier and disrupting her alignment, she waits to the pull to really make it happen. And that allows her to wait a little bit longer, keep resistance really low for as long as possible. Now, it's also possible to breathe too late. So for example, if she was to wait, not breathe, it's probably going to compromise the pull a little bit if she waits too long. And she's going to try to have to lift the upper body without using the arms to create a little pressure down on the water. That's going to be a lot harder. And more importantly, she's going to be ready to recover the arms, but she won't have breathed yet. And that's just going to slow her down. It's just going to make sure it takes more time for her to get back in alignment. And the last thing swimmers want to do is be stuck in this position, waiting to breathe, instead of trying to get the head back down in line as fast as possible. Now, if we look at the recovery of the breath, what we'll see is the head gets back down as the hands reach full extension. So what we don't want to see is a late breath where swimmers are out in line with their hands out in front and they're still waiting for that head to come down, or even waiting for the chest to come down. And so the more that they can get the head back down in time with the arms, and the more aggressive they can be with that, the less time they're going to spend in a position like this where they're creating more resistance than they want to. So the faster they can recover from the breath and get everything back down in line, the faster they're going to be able to minimize the amount of resistance they're creating and therefore increase the amount of speed that they're creating. So we'll see the same skill with this swimmer. So again, once those hands are full extension, her head's already back in line, so she can get everything back in line. And when breaststrokers are sprinting, they need to be able to do that really fast, because we'll see as this swimmer, she's going to get into the next stroke right away. So if she has to wait to get back in line, that's just going to slow her stroke rate down unnecessarily. And so the more that she can get back in line with the head and the hands at the same time, everything's going to happen faster. She can get into the next stroke cycle faster, and she's going to spend less time in this position, which is going to be creating a lot of resistance. So the faster she can get back in line, the more speed she'll create, because she can keep the rate up, and she'll create less resistance. So if we take a look at another swimmer, this swimmer is going to lift his head a little bit earlier, but he's not going to breathe really until he gets into the meat of the pull, just like we saw with those other swimmers. And so again, if you watch the hips too, the hips stay up and in line. They may even come up a little bit. And again, he's driving back down, trying to get the head back down fast in time with the recovery as well. And so not spending a lot of time in this position, trying to get out of it quickly, get out of it aggressively, and taking that breath through the pull is when the body will rise, and that's when swimmers want to take the advantage of that body angle so they can get the breath and then be aggressive with getting back in line as quickly as possible. And again, throughout the breath, those hips aren't dropping. He's holding that position the whole time through, and that's going to be a really effective breath. The more swimmers can hold their position, that means they're breathing in a way that's not causing the hips to drop, and the more they can do that, the more speed they're going to create. To get a sense of the aggressiveness of recovering from the breath, we'll take a look at it over the surface, and you can see how forcefully and how much aggression they're applying to get back into line as fast as they can and really drive everything forwards. And the same thing with the breath itself, you'll see that they're breathing forwards as opposed to just straight up. It's a forwards and up motion, and that's what's going to allow them to keep the hips up in line. So if they can breathe forward and up through the breath, that'll keep the hips up. But if they just breathe straight up, that's going to cause the hips to drop. And so more swimmers can be aggressive with going forward with the breath and then forward with the recovery of the breath. That's going to minimize the disruption of the alignment. That's going to get them out of those positions as quickly as possible, get them back in alignment as much as possible. And just as importantly, it's going to allow them to keep the stroke rate up so that they don't have to wait for the breath, especially in a sprint race like this. They can get right into the next stroke cycle, having already established their line again. And that way they can keep resistance low while still keeping the stroke rate really high. If you want to learn more about how to improve breathing in breaststroke, check out the video below.